Hi friends, for our last Black History highlight, I'm going to be reading William Still and His Freedom Stories, The Father of the Underground Railroad by Don Tate. Don is both the author and the illustrator, and I know I've mentioned before that he's somebody I know from my hometown of Austin, Texas, so I have a lot of his books in the library. Let me see if there's a picture of him in the back so I can show you what he looks like. Yes, here he is. So here's a picture of Don Tate. He's also an African-American author-illustrator. He got started doing illustrations, and then he enjoyed it so much he branched out into book writing as well. And this is one of his newest books, and it's already won some awards. So these end papers are really things that were written by William Still. He found these and used them in his book, which I think is really, really cool. So William Still, Father of the Underground Railroad. This story begins at a time when the United States was split in two. In the North, black people were free. In the South, they were enslaved by whites. Slavery was a nightmare, backbreaking work under the scorching sun, threats of lashings or worse, and no pay. Children were separated from their mommies and papas. Brothers and sisters sold away at auction, never to be seen again. Sometime during the 1700s, Levian and Sidney Steele were held captive on a Maryland farm, forced to work. Their 4 children were 2. The family yearned to live free. I will die before I submit to the yoke, Levin told the man who enslaved him. The two came to an agreement. Levin was allowed to work over hours, actually receiving a small income. With the money he earned, Levin purchased his freedom. But freedom wasn't always fair, especially to black people. Could a free black man remain in the South? Levin must have wondered. Might he be re-enslaved again? No chancing that. Levin bid his family goodbye with a plan to return to rescue them later. In a blink, he bolted north. Sidney wasn't so fortunate. There was no opportunity for her and the children to purchase their own freedom. They remained behind, still enslaved, a separation Sidney could not endure. Torn and tormented, she whispered a parting prayer for her 2 boys, who were big and strong enough to fend for themselves. Then she escaped with her 2 girls. Think about how hard that must have been. She escaped and left her 2 boys behind. That must have been brutal. Sidney reunited with her husband in the pine woods near Washington Township, New Jersey. Now they were together, free as the wind. They changed their last name from Steele to Still to throw off slave catchers. Now, so even if you escaped slavery and you were in the North where slavery is outlawed, if a slave catcher found you, they could still bring you back to the South because you'd broken the law by escaping. So they had to be really, really careful. I also wonder how she found him because remember, there's no computers, no phones, so it must be really hard to find somebody during that time. Their new life was good, but living ached like an open sore. Levin and Sidney longed for the 2 sons they had left behind. Over the years, the family grew. Now there were 15 children, 15 mouths to feed. Oh, how they struggled. Money was tight, food was scarce. Shoes, if any, were hand-me-downs. In 1821, the youngest child was born. Sunlit eyes, mahogany skin, they named him William. He grew quick as a weed. Eight years later, a neighbor was attacked late one night. The man had once been enslaved in the South. He'd escaped and found peace in the pines. Slave catchers tracked the man down. They rushed at him, cuffed his arms, and beat him badly. Thankfully, the man escaped again, but he needed help, and soon. The greedy men were still on the prowl. The neighbors called on William, the young boy who knew every nook and cranny of the woods. William led the man to safety, some 20 miles away, the experience to find the rest of his life. William's father ruled the roost, his rules. Chores were the priority, education was not. Schooling had to wait for rainy days when the ground was too soggy for work. William looked forward to sharpening his mind, but attending class was no easy walk in the woods. The North might have been free, but free was not always fair, especially to black people. One day, on the walk home after school, while white kids pushed William over the side of the bridge, they laughed and William plunged into the water. Eventually, William's father pulled him out of school. Learning to read would have to wait a few seasons. Can you imagine them doing that to him? Just because they were in the North and they were now free doesn't mean that everybody liked them. 3 winters later, conditions had improved. William returned to class when he was 17. He was there by sunrise and home after dusk. He studied spelling, defined words, practiced enunciation, learned math. Before long, he knew how to write, too. One wintry evening, warmed by the fire, William grasped his favorite newspaper, The Colored American, an anti-slavery newspaper. It was owned and published by black people. They published stories that protested discrimination against black people in the North. They printed stories that encouraged emancipation of slaves in the South. The newspaper made William recall his parents' stories about slavery, stories about escape, stories about his older brothers left behind to suffer in bondage. William shouldered those stories into the next chapter of his life. By age 23, William craved more excitement, as any young man would. Life in the pines moved at a snail's pace. Might the big city bring bigger opportunities? In 1844, he decided to find out. With $3 in his pocket and $1 billion in his pride, William planted himself north of the Delaware River in East Philadelphia. First things first, he needed a job and a roof over his head. Neither came readily. Sorry, it's hard for me. This book is so long, it's hard for me to hold it so you can actually see it. For 3 long years, William bounced from low-paying jobs to low-paying job. He threshed clamshells, hauled wood, laid bricks. He peddled oysters, dug wells, hawked clothes. He worked on a dock, then at a hotel, barely earning enough money. Long, cold winters, grumbling belly, no decent place to lay his head, not as glamorous as the life he had imagined. But then a new opportunity arose. The Pennsylvania Anti-Slavery Society needed an office clerk. The pay was disappointingly low, but the job might lead William straight to the most prominent anti-slavery organizers in the area. With a foot in the door, maybe he could help enslaved people escape from the South. Reluctantly, he accepted the job. "I go for liberty and improvement," William wrote in a letter to his new employers. In his new job, William sorted mail, emptied trash, swept office floors until his arms ached, not quite what he had hoped. William's employers were doing the work he wanted to do. They were abolitionists who spoke loudly against slavery. They sponsored meetings, signed petitions, published newspapers. William worked hard beyond his office duties. He earned his employers' trust, gained their respect, their loyalty. He climbed higher and higher until one day he became the manager. That's very impressive. If you'll notice a theme in all these books that we've been reading or listening to is the determination. People who are not giving up, no matter what their life circumstances are and how unfairly they've been treated, they just keep working hard and they keep their eye on what I would say the dream or the prize, and they keep working toward it. At that time, freedom-seeking people were drawn to Philadelphia like a magnet. It was the nearest free city to the slave-holding South. They arrived daily by the dozens, passengers on a secret network called the Underground Railroad. Freedom-seeking men and women, young and old and in between, running, hiding, praying. They traveled from house to church, river to swamp, stop to stop to stop. It was a dangerous, top-secret journey from slavery to freedom. The passengers who arrived in Philadelphia were tired. They were sick and hungry, cut up, broken, marred, and maimed, frantic, fearful, and fed up, but hopeful. William sought these travelers out and welcomed them into his home, which was now a station on the Underground Railroad. So in case you're not sure, they call it a railroad because people are moving from one place to another. They're not on a real railroad. They're running. Sometimes they might be hiding in the back of somebody's wagon, or mostly they're running. They're running through the river so the dogs can't smell their scent. They're hiding in people's barns and safe places, but there's no railroad really involved. I know that's confusing sometimes. One evening, an unexpected passenger arrived at his office. The man was middle-aged, stooped back, furrowed brow, threadbare clothes. His name was Peter. He was looking for his mother, his family. Peter recounted his story, and William listened in awe. Turned out, Peter had been enslaved in the South for more than 40 years. He'd gotten away, and now he wanted to find his family who had escaped before him. Peter recalled the names of his parents, Levin and Sidney. He named one of his brothers, Levin. William was thunderstruck. Could this man be his Peter? His long-lost but never forgotten older brother? Yes, he was. But Peter was confused by William's news. Was this some kind of trick to capture and return him to the South? He needed some convincing. So isn't that amazing? So some guy comes into his office, and it turns out to be his brother who his mother had to leave behind in slavery, which is so sad. From a mother who looked just like him. Peter's story was sad, tragic, miraculous, and extraordinary. And Peter's story restored his family. Could other people's stories reunite other families torn apart by slavery? That must have been really hard to know that his whole family was free and he had all these brothers and sisters he didn't even know. And the whole time he'd been enslaved and being treated really badly. That must really hurt. From that point on, William recorded every detail about each freedom seeker who passed through his home or office. He recorded their names, ages, boy or girl, man or woman, the hue of their skin, copper, chestnut, dark brown. Who had enslaved them? Where did they come from? Where were they going? It wasn't his job to do so, but William thought that written records might help someday. William's hard work didn't go unnoticed. He climbed higher and higher at the Anti-Slavery Society, becoming the leader of a committee assigned to help freedom-seeking people. William corresponded with other agents on the Underground Railroad. He conducted interviews, counted money. He planned the rescues of freedom-seeking people. But his work didn't stop there. Think about it. There's no computers, so it's very hard to keep records, but it's really smart that he wrote everything down, so it would make it a lot easier to see where people were going, where they'd come from, and get them connected to their families, like his brother. William also recorded the stories of people seeking freedom on his line of the Underground Railroad. In many ways, this was his most important work. William and Ellen Craft, a married couple, escaped slavery in Georgia. Traveling on first-class trains, they stayed in the best hotels and dined with the steamboat captain, all in disguise. Fair-skinned Ellen passed as a white man. Her husband pretended to be her slave. Look, so this is the wife, and she's African-American, but her skin is so light, she dressed up like a man and pretended that he was her slave, but it's really her husband. And they were both slaves, and so they traveled out in the open. A man enslaved in Virginia climbed into a wooden crate and had himself shipped 28 hours to freedom, earning the name Henry Box Brown, who you should already know about because we read about him. And on several nights, freedom-seeking people passed through William's home of the line of the Underground Railroad network, led by Harriet Moses Tubman herself, who had gone into the belly of the South to rescue them. William's committee provided them with money and replaced their worn shoes. So here's his notebook where he's keeping all the facts of the people who are traveling. I mean, if he hadn't written it down, we wouldn't know any of these really fascinating stories. William's work grew 2, 3, 4 times as long. His records helped reunite families torn apart by slavery to find each other once they'd found freedom. But when enslaved people escaped, their southern enslavers lost money and they demanded new laws. In 1850, the Fugitive Slave Act was enacted. It required the return of runaways who had been captured, even if they found their way to freedom. People living in free states where slavery was outlawed were forced to cooperate with the law or be brutally punished. The Fugitive Slave Act resulted in the kidnapping of free black people by greedy slave catchers and federal agents. No black person, free or not, north or south, was safe. William's work now put him in great danger. His records were evidence of crimes committed. So if you were African American, you're walking down the street, you could have been captured by somebody who was trying to collect a reward, even if you'd always been free, just because you're African American. I mean, it was really terrifying. William had a plan. He bundled his records and all those stories and placed them where no one would think to look. In the back of a cemetery, inside a dark vault, among the rats and the dead. The laws were meant to shut down the Underground Railroad, but shut it down they did not. In Pennsylvania and New York, Michigan and Vermont, black people, black neighborhoods, black churches drove the Underground Railroad full steam north, carrying freedom-seeking people straight on into Canada, known as Freedmen's Land, where they could be safe. So the only way at this point that you were truly safe is if you got to Canada. If you got to Canada, they could not get you back again because Canada's a different country and their rules were very different. And they would not give you back to the United States and back to slavery. Sorry, there we go. William's work at the Anti-Slavery Society was outstanding, but after 14 long years, he had barely made any more money than he had on the day he started. Helping freedom seekers was his passion, but passion didn't put food on the table for his growing family. It was time for a change. William resigned from his job at the Anti-Slavery Society and he started a coal business. In 1860, the United States was bitterly divided over the issue of slavery. War broke out and many died. In 1861, a new president was elected. Could Abraham Lincoln reunite the country? Would he choose freedom or slavery? In time, Lincoln did the right thing. He chose freedom. William's coal business thrived in the shadow of the Civil War. By the 1870s, he was one of the richest black men of the time. But even now, life was still not always fair, especially to black people. William used his power and influence to help. Black children had been excluded from the YMCA, so William helped start a branch for them. Black people had been forbidden from riding Philadelphia's streetcars, so William protested and won. In 1872, he published a book, The Underground Railroad, a collection of stories of hardships and hairbreadth escapes. William Still's records and the stories he preserved reunited families torn apart by slavery, because that's what stories can do. Protest injustice, soothe, teach, inspire, connect. Stories save lives. William's stories needed to be told so slavery's nightmare will never happen again. So here are little sentences about the stories that he wrote. I would love to I wonder if that's still available. I would love to read that. I'd love to read about the slaves and, I don't know, about their lives and how they traveled, and I think it's really interesting. So as all good nonfiction will have, at the back is the timeline. It's called The Life and Times of William Still, and it has all the dates of significant things in his life. And then the author has a note that will tell you why he was interested in the story, what it took for him to write the story, the kind of research he did, because when you're writing nonfiction, you have to do research. And then it also shows you the other sources he used. Don Tate had to read books about William Still, had to look for, he found his own writings and everything. And so this is the information that is here. And here's a drawing of William Still. Actually, this is a photograph, I guess, of him in real life. I hope you like that book. I think it's a really great book, and it makes me really, really want to learn more about William Still, but mostly it makes me want to learn about those slave stories and just see what they did to start their new lives and how hard it was. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this story, and I hope it makes you want to do some more research on your own to learn more about slavery and how terrible it really was. All right, friends, happy reading.